Hey everyone, Sycra here, and in this lesson I'm going to be talking about maintaining proportions. So, to begin with, I have to cover some theory. So, I'm going to start, and you might know this, and if you do, don't worry about it. If you don't, then this is for you. Maybe you just need a refresher. Alright, so here's a rectangle, and if you're doing this traditionally, I've heard you can use a ruler to draw straight lines. Personally, I use scissors for that. I use rulers for other things, but anyway, so here's a rectangle, and now if I take any two opposing corners, so like the bottom left and top right corner, or the top left and bottom right, and I connect them with this diagonal line, that gives me an angle. So here we go, angle. Now if I copy this angle, so what I'm doing is, now I'm just gonna try and freehand it, I guess, but I'm just moving my arm over this line as if I'm going to draw it, but I'm not touching the tip of the stylus to the screen, or in another case the pencil tip to the paper. Just ghosting it so I get my arm in this movement so I can kind of copy it. So okay, so let's say I copy that angle, and it's not exact. Try a different one. And by the way, I'm getting these straight lines by holding down, like I put a line, or I put a dot, I hold down shift, and then I like touch. Or you can draw horizontal lines by just touching your thing to the tablet or the screen, and then holding shift, and then going across or up. Gives you straight lines. Okay, so if I have the same angle, then no matter if I bring a line straight up and then straight across so it touches that, so no matter how big or small this is going to be the same proportion as this. So I could make a really small one. But this proportion is the same as this, the same as that. Can make a bigger one. But as long as this line is going straight through, proportions are going to be the same. So that's really important, because if you use this, that's basically saying as long as I know this, the angle of this line, then when I start drawing, I can make it any size as long as that angle is the same. It's going to be in proportion. Alright, so the next thing I want to cover is how to find the middle of any rectangular shape. So right now we have a diagonal going this way. Now if I join the other corners, I get an X, and where these 2 points meet, that is the middle. So sometimes you'll see tutorials where people have broken things down, and I think this is probably the easiest way to do things yourself, to see how things are broken down. And I'll talk more about that later, but for now that's it, and so now I have this broken down into halves, right? And again, if I want to find the middle of like this one, I just connect these two corners, and then it gets me an X, and then I can go straight across, and now I've broken this down in half. I can go that way, and that's broken down in half. And you just can keep doing this, and eventually you'll end up with a grid. Now this isn't exactly a grid method tutorial. That's not really what I'm doing. I just want to cover, how you can see proportions a little bit easier. So these are the two main concepts that you need to know. One, again, is that if you have the angle right, it doesn't matter how big or small your drawings are, as long as the angles are the same. And the other thing is if you want to, split things, if you want to find the middle, find out how to break things down into half. I actually don't use this. I mean, this is really used a lot in perspective to find the middle of things. For instance, if I had something going to a vanishing point and it was some kind of rectangle and I wanted to find the middle of this rectangle in perspective, then that is the middle. And it's not that easy to it's not that easy to just guess this, because like this is half and this is half and these two aren't the same. But in this case, the way I actually do it in application is I just get my pen and I put it here and I put one here. I just go up and down until I feel the middle. So let's see. Say I want to find the middle of this line. I'll just go up and down, up and down, and up and down, and then, I don't know, just somehow doing this, I can guess at the middle. I guess if you're better with just seeing things, you can just look at it and say, okay, that's the middle, for instance. And now let's see how accurate that is. So I can just connect these two, and I was a bit off, so the middle is actually there. And with this one, let's see. It's actually a little bit closer. So yeah, you have muscle, I don't know if it's muscle memory or something, but anyway, in your muscle, if you just move your arm, you can kind of feel where the middle is. I don't know, maybe not for everyone, but for me that's kind of how it is. Alright, now let's move to some more practical application. So, here I just have some objects, and what I'm going to do is probably I'm just going to switch over to drawing freehand. I don't think my lines are going to be too great today, but we'll see. So let's say I want to draw this key in proportion. What I can do is try and fit this in a box. And get this angle from this corner to this corner. If I can get that angle right, terrible. Okay, if I can get that angle and then try and copy that angle. And one of the ways of checking angles is to take your pencil, pen, or stylus and hold it up to the angle so that it's covering this point, and that will give you the angle, and then you can compare it to your own. So this one's close. But anyway, so I have this angle. Now I can get a rectangle. And this is roughly my box for my key. And you'll notice it's not the same size at all, right? Like, it's much bigger. But this is fine. And this is what comes up, when you're doing life drawing. If the things are the same size, I think it's called sight sizing, where you draw. So for instance, if I wanted to draw this bottle, I would, draw it exactly at the same size, like that. And often you would have the picture reference just stuck beside your own paper when you're doing this, but I'm not going to be doing that. Anyway, so I have that key, I have the box, and of course if you're drawing from life, you're not going to be able to put a box around the person, but it's more a way of thinking. So it's gonna be more difficult than just easily, that's why I'm not holding down the shift key, because it would make it easier than it is in real life. It's not that easy. But anyway, you still can do things like measure with your pen, hold it up, and kind of guess where the angles are. So now, because I made an X, so I can find the midpoint. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to connect this and get the middle. And, again, it's rough and dirty, but what I do see is that if I divide this key in half, the circle part of it, how there's like the circle, and there's the long part. Well, the circle part is within this half area. So kind of divided that, and I could do roughly the same thing, get the circle in, and I can see also that, the height of this and this, it's almost like 1/3. So I can do that as well, divide from here to here in thirds, and that's about that. And then you've got this triangle and this triangle. And then this is how you break things down. So if someone has a tutorial and they show you that, start with a box, divide it in half, break this area to this area in thirds, thirds, and then, I don't know what we'd say this is, maybe go a little bit inside here, and then join this to this, that to that, make a circle in this box, and then you have your, in general, you have the proportions of the key. And you can go inside this box, for instance, and then break that down, make an X, find the middle, and we see that if we do that, that this circle-y thing, this hole, is on this side of the midpoint. So that's pretty much it. That's how to get the thing in proportion. It doesn't mean it's looking great. That's not what I'm after. Or, I don't know, I guess you are after that in drawings, but it's more just getting proportions, because if you don't do it this way, and I mean, you don't have to, but if you just were to look at this and then draw it, the tendency is probably to make that circle too big, and make the, I don't know what this is, that part maybe too thin, maybe too thick as well. That could be another tendency. But then the proportions are off. So it's okay. Once you get better at doing things like this, you'll be able to just look at this and see, okay, I can kind of see these lines. I don't have to draw them, but I see that this circle-y thing is halfway. Like if I divide this circle in half, that circle, and maybe it's better to use a different color, this circle, if I divide this in half, is on this side, right? And you can do the same thing with stuff like this. So let's see, I'm just gonna roughly start guessing now. So I'm just checking this angle and this angle in my mind. So I'm not actually drawing it anymore, but roughly this is the proportion. And then I can see this is not straight up and down. If I draw a straight up and down, it will look like that. So I can tell that it's at a bit of an angle, so I can try and put that angle in and then start fitting it into this box. And again, it's not exact, but it's close, right? It's giving you something to work with. So now I can say like, okay, roughly this is the shape. And the more you break it down, the easier it is to see details, because I have more to compare to. So for instance, with the key, after I get this big circle, this one, then it's easier to compare from here to get that smaller circle. And I can notice things like, well, this space between this circle and the edge on mine is way too big. Like this space is too big, so either I make the, actually that's exactly what I have to do. I have to make that hole bigger. Right? So I hope this is making sense. It's just a way of finding things. So same thing with this. If I want to see how the proportions, I can fit it in a box. Another thing I can do is skip the box and just say things like this. Okay, what's this angle? So that's that, and I can measure it and get that down. And then what's the angle from here to here? So I'm just kind of connecting it in its own shape, and I can just kind of copy this shape then. So as long as this angle, this one here, is right, then so far the size doesn't matter. So I can make this really big, and then it just means the rest gets bigger, or I can make it smaller, or I can try make it the same size. But then this angle, like once I have this now I cannot keep making things. Like if this is defined, I'm sorry, I'm not good at talking, but if this is defined, then I'm limited in where I end this. I can't just end it anywhere. I'd probably end it somewhere like that. No, maybe a bit further. Somewhere like that, maybe. But anyway, this is how you get your proportions down. And then you can see that there's something like this. And again, I'm looking at the angles, right? And there's a little part that comes down. So now, here's another thing I want to talk about, which is relationships. So angles is one thing, and relationships is another. So what do I mean by relationships? I mean relating one thing to another. So if I look at this point here, and I go straight down, I notice that this point is slightly outside of that. So I can do the same thing here. I can get this, go straight down, and notice that this is slightly outside of that. So now when I draw that in, that's what I'm looking at. And that's how I can get the proportions. And I mean, it's not perfect. What I'm doing is not perfect, and that's why it still takes practice, and it still takes a lot of, I don't know, yeah, just practice. But it's easier than if you go in blind, right? If you're not using any methods and you're not really checking angles, and I mean, I guess that's okay as well. You'll eventually get it. You can just train your eye. But I see sometimes even people who are experienced, they tend to make some mistakes when they just rely purely on their eye and not on angles. So this way it's just a bit easier. Another thing I can look at is the negative space formed here, and compare that to this negative space. And does it look the same? Are the shapes similar, right? And I guess they are pretty close. You could think of it as there's a triangle here, and a triangle here, and a triangle here, and a triangle here, and just see, do those triangles match? And if they do, okay, it's pretty close, right? And I can find the negative space here, and it gives me this kind of shape. I can look at mine, and I don't have that shape. I just have this shape. So what that means is this part needs to be more out, like that. And then I can get this shape.